In this game, we see Alexei Shirov with the white pieces, a creative and aggressive player known for dynamic, tactical play. Facing him is Anatoly Karpov, playing black, a former world champion and a master of positional chess, precision, and long-term strategy. This game is a textbook demonstration of how Karpov gradually takes over the queenside while shutting down any hopes of counterplay on the kingside. It's a smooth, methodical win. Pure Karpov. Shirov opens with pawn to e4. Karpov replies with pawn to c6, the Caro-Kann defense. After pawn to d4 and pawn to d5, white chooses the advanced variation with pawn to e5. Now bishop to f5, knight to f3, and Karpov plays pawn to e6, solid as ever. Bishop to e2 from Shirov, and the early challenge to the center comes with pawn to c5. White castles, black develops the knight to c6. Then pawn to c3 from Shirov to hold the center, and Karpov captures on d4. White recaptures. Knight to e7 follows, and white plays pawn to a3, a flexible waiting move. Karpov now retreats the knight to c8. At first glance it might seem odd, but in this line of the Caro-Kann, it's a well-known idea. The knight reroutes to more useful squares like b6 or even c4 if the opportunity arises. Shirov continues with knight to d2, bishop to e7 from Karpov, then pawn to b3 from white, and Karpov gains space on the queenside with pawn to a5. White develops bishop to b2. The knight drops back to a7, continuing the maneuver. Rook to e1, and Karpov castles. Shirov starts repositioning with knight to f1. Karpov brings rook to c8. White continues with knight to g3, and Karpov responds with bishop to g6. Queen to d2, and the black queen shifts to b6, building pressure on the queenside. White's bishop drops to d1, and Karpov quietly doubles his rooks. First rook to c7. Shirov begins a kingside plan with pawn to h4, met by pawn to h6 from Karpov, controlling the g5 square. Rook to e2. And now the second rook joins the c-file, rook to c8. It's slow, patient build-up. Classic Karpov. Shirov places the queen on f4. Karpov responds with a curious move, knight back to b8. It looks strange, but there's a deep logic behind it. The knight makes room for the rooks, or can head to d7 for kingside coverage. It's also a subtle waiting move, asking white to commit. Rook to e3 from Shirov, then the knight hops to b5. Knight to e2, and Karpov centralizes with knight to d7. White's other knight comes to h2, then rook to c6, likely to free the back rank for the queen. Knight to g4. The queen retreats to d8. Rook swings to h3, and the queen steps up to f8. Now comes a queenside push, pawn to a4. Karpov immediately challenges it with knight to a3, offering an exchange. Shirov accepts, bishop takes a3, and black recaptures with bishop takes a3. At this point, the long diagonal from a3 to f8 is wide open, and Karpov is the only one left with a dark squared bishop. White has just exchanged off their own, which means that piece, now on a3, has no rival. From now on, it becomes a dominant long-range force. It eyes the kingside, supports potential pressure on c1, and anchors the entire queenside. And with the center closed, there's no easy way for white to strike back. That makes the bishop even more powerful. There are fewer open lines to complicate the game. This is where Karpov's strategy starts paying off. There's no tactical breakthrough, no flashiness, just pure, incremental advantage. Shirov's options are shrinking. White activates the rook with rook to g3. Karpov clamps down with pawn to h5. The knight drops to e3. Bishop to b2 follows, pressuring key diagonals. White moves the rook to a2, attacking the bishop. The bishop slides to c1 and becomes a serious annoyance. It invites knight takes c1, but that would let the rook invade. Ignore it, and it just sits there, limiting white's coordination. Queen to g5 from Shirov. Karpov answers with queen to b4. Knight jumps to f4, but now comes the break. Bishop takes on e3. Shirov recaptures with the pawn and Karpov places his rook on c1, pinning white's bishop. White takes the bishop on g6 with the knight. Then comes rook takes on d1, check. King to h2, and now black's pawn takes on g6. White grabs it back with queen takes g6, threatening checkmate on g7. Karpov calmly centralizes the queen with queen to e7. The rest is just cleanup. Rook to f2, a bad mistake from Caro-Kann Shirov. There's a tactical combination that wins here. Feel free to pause the video if you want to search for black's best move here. Okay. Queen takes on h4 check. Rook to h3, but queen takes on f2. And Shirov resigns. A flawless positional win by Karpov. Nothing flashy, just perfect control.